Good morning, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of Minnesota Housing, I'd like to welcome you to our Qualified Allocation Plan 101 webinar. The purpose of today's webinar is twofold. We'd like to present sort of a foundational background on our Qualified Allocation Plan, which is our plan for the distribution of low-income housing tax credits, which are an important source of funding for creating and preserving affordable multifamily housing. As well as providing an overview of proposed changes to the 2019 Qualified Allocation Plan, which sets out priorities for how we will select housing tax credit projects on a go-forward basis. In terms of today's meeting logistics, we have planned about approximately 40 minutes of presentation and content material. We'd like to allocate 20 minutes or so for Q&A. And what we'd like to do is go ahead and go through all of the presentation content, and we will be responding to your Q&A at the end of today's webinar presentation. But we do want to encourage you to go ahead and submit questions in through our chat box as they occur to you. And we have our Community Development Director, Margaret Kaplan, will be tracking all of those questions that come into us to ensure that we will be able to respond to you either during the Q&A portion of today's session, or we will extend this an additional 10 minutes for further Q&A beyond that to make sure that we are being able to be responsive to all of your questions. I'd like to just highlight today's presenters. They include Commissioner Tingerthal, who will provide an overview of the agency's strategic direction and priorities. Summer Jefferson, the Tax Credit Program Manager, who will cover the purpose and history of the QAP and provide some context on how this important tool helps create affordable housing investment. I am Devin Pullman. I'm a supervisor relatively new to the multifamily division. And I will guide the discussion highlighting changes to the proposed changes to the 2019 QAP. We're also joined by John Patterson, the Director of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, who will discuss scoring for the 2019 QAP, as well as orient us to several maps outlining points associated with various location-specific 2019 QAP scoring criteria. And Margaret Kaplan, our Director of Community Development, will highlight public engagement opportunities. Following this webinar, there will be several other opportunities to comment and digest some of the information presented here today to give you time to think through feedback or other opportunities that you'll have to share your responses and clarifications or other important feedback to us here at Minnesota Housing. The toolbar on the upper right-hand side of your screen allows you to ask questions using the questions feature, which is indicated with the orange arrow. Please, again, feel free to type in questions as we move through today's webinar. We won't answer them directly as we switch from presenter to presenter, but we will save time at the end for your Q&A. You have two opportunities to listen to the webinar today, either through your computer or through the telephone. I also just want to highlight that we have several handouts that are accessible via the GoToWebinar on the right-hand side of your screen. If you are able to expand the handouts, there's a little arrow. You will be able to access any of the three handouts. The first includes a screenshot or PDF version of the PowerPoint slides for today's presentation. The second is the 2019 proposed QAP content and scoring change summary document. And I'll be highlighting that and going into a little more in depth on that, but that is a nice resource. It's also available on our website. And the last handout is a history of the QAP that shows a timeline of policy changes and transformations we've made to the QAP priority setting process through the years, including what's proposed for 2019. So I wanted to make sure you had access to those tools as we move through today's presentation. With that, I will pause slightly and turn it over to Commissioner Tingerthal to begin today's session.
Good morning, everyone. This is Mary Tingerthal, Commissioner at Minnesota Housing. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be with us today. Devin talked a little bit about the purpose of the meeting, but I want to review again that the Qualified Allocation Plan is a really very important document for us at Minnesota Housing. It's our opportunity once a year to be able to spell out in a very public way what the priorities are that will be used to determine how competitive resources that we have available for housing, most specifically low-income housing tax credits, will be allocated. And the qualified allocation plan is more than just the scoring. It really also incorporates a lot of our procedural requirements, and it's something that is really coming into focus as being an incredibly important part of the responsibilities of housing finance agencies across the country. So we take it seriously. We know that you take it seriously. We have decided to take a little different approach this year. Last year, we received a number of comments that our QAP was getting too complicated. And at the time we received those comments, we didn't really have the time to make those changes. So we've worked very hard over the past year to take those comments to heart. And we hope that by the time you've seen all the materials for the QAP this year, that you will agree that we have found some opportunities for streamlining and clarity. And I know I probably don't have to encourage you that if we haven't hit the mark on that, that you will in fact let us know as soon as possible about any concerns that you continue to have. The purpose of the QAP is really to set forward those guidelines for the low-income housing tax credit, and each year we develop this QAP through a series of reviews that we look at mathematically. We look at the results that have come out, and I know that Summer will review that in more detail with you later. So we will talk about the strategic and policy priorities that are reflected in the QAP, the changes that are intended to streamline and provide more clarity, and then we will talk about some of the test cases that we used to test whether the scoring, in fact, is maintaining the priorities that we intend. And you'll hear more about that from John Patterson. One overarching thing I want to say about the QAP this year is that it was not our intent to make major policy changes. We thought that last year's selections did a good job of reflecting the policies that we were trying to highlight and emphasize. And so the changes this year are really more about streamlining and clarity, and rather than any major changes in policy. So I'd like to talk for just a minute as a backdrop to the QAP about Minnesota Housing's strategic direction. For those of you who work with the agency, this won't be new news for you, but I do think it's helpful as we embark on yet another year of developing guidelines for future housing developments, that we keep in mind our vision, which is that all Minnesotans live in a safe, stable home they can afford in a community of their choice, and our mission that housing is a foundation for success, so we collaborate with individuals, communities, and partners to create, preserve, and finance affordable housing. So those are our high-level guidelines. And we also have strategic priorities, and these were adopted last year when we adopted our current strategic plan, and some of them will look very familiar. Some of them changed a little bit last year. The first is preserving housing with federal project-based rental assistance. This has been a priority for many years at Minnesota Housing. And as the rental housing market has become more competitive, I would say that in the last year, we have really seen a step up in the number of projects that are changing ownership, that are looking at whether they are going to renew their Section 8 contracts. And so there has been a real pickup in activity in this category. Second, preventing and ending homelessness. is something that we have continued over the last many years. As I testified at the Capitol this year for continuing resources in this area, I was able to talk about the fact that since the adoption of the state's plan to prevent and end homelessness, we have seen a 13% decrease in the point-in-time count homelessness numbers, as well as in the Wilder count that was done last year. The third, and just on homelessness, that really is attributable to the fact that we have put up hundreds of units of permanent supportive housing over the last several years, something I think this state should be very proud of. Financing housing that's responsive to Minnesota's changing demographics. This is really reflecting issues like the growing number of seniors that need affordable housing, as well as an increase that we see in greater Minnesota around the number of large families that are migrating out to communities in greater Minnesota for employment opportunities. Addressing specific and critical local housing needs, this really focuses on the fact that we've tried to emphasize over the last several years that the best housing development projects are really those that grow up out of communities talking about what kinds of housing they need and working together with developers to bring forward the most critical housing development projects in their communities. This links with our community dialogues that we do in greater Minnesota, and we've really been pleased with how strong the applications have become in the last several years for projects, particularly in greater Minnesota. And finally, our homeownership strategic priority is around reducing Minnesota's racial and ethnic homeownership disparity. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Summer Jefferson to talk about the background on low-income housing tax credits.
Thank you, Mary. Hello, my name is Summer Jefferson. I'm the Tax Credit Allocation Program Manager at Minnesota Housing. I assist in the annual development of the Qualified Allocation Plan and then oversee implementation of the tax credit program. In the next section, I'd like to provide some background on the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program and the purpose and the history of Minnesota Housing's Qualified Allocation Plan. So the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program is a federal resource that's governed by IRS law. It provides tax credits to companies and people that invest in affordable rental housing, reducing their federal tax liability by the amount of the tax credits for a 10-year period. In exchange for this reduction in their tax liability, investors purchase the tax credits and agree to keep units affordable to households that are earning 60% of area median income or less. In today's market, a dollar of tax credits sells for approximately 90 cents. So the sales proceeds from the credits are then invested in new construction of affordable housing or acquisition and rehabilitation of existing properties. There are two distinct types of tax credits that they are commonly referred to as the 9% and 4% tax credit. The 9% credits are very limited and are only available through a competitive process. We typically receive maybe 3 or 4 times greater requests than the amount of credits that are available. And then the 4% credits are only available when taxes and bonds are used. And these credits are not limited and are available via pipeline process throughout the year. For the remainder of our presentation, we will focus on the 9% tax credit. So the next slide covers the distribution of tax credits throughout the state. In Minnesota, state statutes create a number of rules regarding the tax credit program. The most significant is the fact that they established Minnesota Housing as the primary allocating agency and also established a number of cities and counties as sub-allocators. The sub-allocators that allocate these that allocate their own credits are Minneapolis, St. Paul, Dakota County, and Washington County. They each receive their own allocation and have their own qualified allocation plans and application schedules. The slide shows the estimated distribution for 2018. The total statewide credits are approximately 12.9 million, with 9.6 allocated by Minnesota Housing and the other 3 million distributed among the sub-allocators. So why are tax credits important? The amount of leverage that tax credits provide to the affordable housing market is substantial. Minnesota Housing's annual tax credit allocation funds anywhere between 12 to 15 affordable projects, representing 700 to 900 units. These tax credits are sold to investors and generate approximately 90 million in proceeds for affordable housing. The total development cost of projects financed with competitive tax credits is approximately 220 million, and the tax credit is a very important component. Because tax credits are so scarce and such an important financing tool, Minnesota Housing has a plan for allocating the credits to developments. This is the Qualified Allocation Plan, or the QAP. The IRS also requires each allocator to have a QAP, and there are certain IRS requirements that must also be included. For example, every allocator must provide preference for projects located in low-income areas that contribute to community revitalization. Again, each sub-allocator has their own qualified allocation plan separate from Minnesota Housing. So looking at the timeline of the QAP, Minnesota Housing develops our QAP about a year in advance to give communities and developers an extra year to plan for any changes. We are currently working on the 2019 Qualified Allocation Plan and which will apply to applications submitted to the agency in the summer of 2018. Initial publishing of this plan will be at the board meeting at the end of May, and then at that time we will begin to solicit public comments and anticipate final approval in July. Minnesota Housing's QAP is made up of 3 core documents: the Qualified Allocation Plan document, the Program Procedural Manual, and the Self-Scoring Worksheet. These documents detail the rules for how tax credits will be distributed throughout the state, what types of projects will be eligible for a set-aside of credits, how funding rounds will be administered, what rules and procedures applicants and the agencies must abide by, and what funding priorities will be used in considering projects. All applications are scored according to the priorities contained in the self-scoring worksheet and then ranked based on score. Every point claimed by the applicant on the self-scoring worksheet is a commitment, and that gets memorialized in the 30-year or longer tax credit restrictions. The remainder of our presentation today will focus on the QAP development and then potential changes to funding priorities for the 2019 QAP. And with that, I will hand it over to Devin.
Okay, in terms of the 2019 proposed QAP, I do want to highlight and stress that these are proposed changes, and this is really an early feedback opportunity, and we are interested in your thoughts and reactions. I think, as Mary had mentioned, did we nail it in terms of some of the streamlining efforts that we are trying to achieve and accomplish, or do you still see substantive opportunities or room for feedback? Again, with this emphasis on streamlining and enhanced clarity, we are still trying to prioritize and make sure the integrity of the QAP priorities that have been in place for several years now, including tax credit developments that were scored in the 2017 funding round, that those are maintained. And those priorities, as shown on this slide, continue to be around serving people with the greatest needs, largest barriers and lowest incomes, promoting housing in areas of opportunity that continues to manifest itself in several different ways with respect to location efficiency, workforce housing communities, areas that are serving larger families with access to high-performing schools, and things of that nature. We certainly continue to support and encourage community and economic development, and we have provided some enhanced clarity around planned community development plans and some enhanced definition around what we're looking for there through our scoring process and in the review of tax credit applications. Our emphasis on preserving existing subsidized and federally assisted housing remains, and we do certainly continue to stress using resources efficiently and leveraging as many resources as we can to help expand affordable housing opportunities throughout the state and reaching lower income populations that can be harder to house. And lastly, we want to do all of this while we're maintaining and financing high quality buildings that continue to be an asset in communities for years and years to come and help enhance the overall vitality of communities. Our 2019 selection categories have expanded, and what we are hoping to accomplish with this expansion, you'll see in the first two, greatest need tenant targeting and serves lowest income for long durations. Prior to now, those had been one selection category. We are recommending breaking them out because they have become fairly large, and we think there are substantive differences, and we hope this provides some additional clarity. So in our greatest need tenant targeting, we are focused on serving large family housing, and that includes providing a tenant selection plan with a preference to serve families with minor children. And in those plans and in these developments, we are looking for 75% of the assisted units to contain 2 or more bedrooms. We also have an emphasis, as Mary highlighted in our strategic plan, to continue to serve high priority homeless populations, and that need to serve permanent supportive housing and provide that housing for high priority homeless remains evident in 2019 as it has been in the past several years as well. Also within this selection category, there is an emphasis on serving people with disabilities as well. Moving into number 2 selection category, serving the lowest income for long durations, there are a couple of kind of key components of this. The first is the percentage of units with rents affordable to households at 50% of HUD's MTSP income limits. Those of you who work with affordable housing programs know there are a variety of different types of income limits that we refer to depending on the funding source. The tax credit program uses MTSP income limits. The second component in serves lowest income for long duration relates to rental assistance, which has been and is increasingly a very critical element of helping us reach lower income populations and helping minimize cost burden of those populations. 2 primary components that we're looking at within our QAP process there relate to the percentage of units that have rental assistance attached to them, and there is an additional tier of even a smaller percentage of units with rental assistance now offers some pointing opportunity in 2019, or at least we're proposing that, and it hasn't in the past. And then we're also looking at continuing to emphasize serving households with incomes that don't exceed 30% of the MTSP income limits, helping minimize that rent burden situation that many of our renters are faced with. Within this category, there also is an expanded affordability option for the 9% credits for 35 or 40 years. Our third selection category relates to areas of opportunity, and those include economic integration, which can be within an individual project and offering different units based on different income tiers and rent tiers. It can also be citing an affordable housing development in a higher income community or area. This also includes access to higher performing schools, workforce housing communities, and location efficiency. Our community and economic development selection category continues to emphasize things like planned community development, recognizing that affordable housing can be one key tool within a broader community's efforts to enhance vitality, vibrancy, community revitalization, or general community development that may be tied to other things and should be tied to other things to enhance vitality within communities, be that transportation, economic development, parks and recreation, or educational opportunities within a community. There's also an emphasis on rural, tribal, and a few other things as required by the IRS tax code within this category. Preservation continues to emphasize sort of a threshold of risk of loss categories that include market conversion, critical physical needs, and ownership capacity or program commitment, termination, or issues that can help us ensure that we are preserving as much of that affordable housing stock as possible. Efficient use of resources and leverage. Again, we continue to emphasize this as we have in the past, recognizing that in order to build more affordable units and reach lower income households, stretching these scarce resources and then leveraging other resources available in broader communities is just critical to helping communities be able to offer to house all of our citizens in an equitable manner. Building characteristics continue to be emphasized, and these include things like opportunities for universal design and smoke-free buildings to ensure healthy housing for all of our residents here in the state of Minnesota. I'm going to talk globally about some of the key changes that are proposed with the 2019 QAP, and again, encourage you to reference the 2019 QAP content and scoring change summary. The first is, and while Summer highlighted that the bulk of this presentation really focuses on the 9% credits, 4% credits that can be used with tax-exempt bonds continue to be a very helpful resource and tool within broader communities. And in an effort to try and ensure that there's more transparency in the scoring that's done with the 4% credits as well as with the 9% credits, we are for the first time recommending that and proposing that we have two distinct self-scoring worksheets that better differentiates how 4% credits are scored and how 9% credits are scored. There are not a substantive amount of changes or differences between those two, but there are some important differences. And we think this will better help identify where those changes are and ensure greater transparency in scoring. The second change is a recommended increase to the per development tax credit cap. Right now that's set at $1 million. We are recommending increasing that to $1.2 million to reflect an adjustment for inflation. The selection categories, as I mentioned on the previous slide, have increased from 6 to 7, recognizing that we are trying to distinguish the targeted populations we're focused on serving from the incomes and rent levels that we're trying to achieve. The specific changes to selection criterion really involve the new long-term affordability, and this is specific to the 9% credits. We do now and are recommending and proposing a pointing incentive for extending out that affordability either to 35 or 40 years through an extended use period and a waiver of the qualified contract. And because our design standards have incorporated high-speed internet and broadband sort of universally into all of the developments that are funded with Minnesota Housing Resources, we are eliminating and recommending elimination of the high-speed internet pointing that was under our building characteristics scoring criterion in the past. As a result of many of the streamlining changes that have been made, and I will go into some more detail about each of those, we did do a really substantive scoring recalibration with the help of our research director, John Patterson, and he's going to talk about sort of the test case scenarios and how we ran projects under the proposed new scoring framework against our 2017 projects that were our most recently funded tax credit projects to ensure, as Mary mentioned, that we maintain the integrity of our policy priorities within the QAP, and that as a result of the streamlining efforts we're making, there aren't unintended policy shifts, because that is not our objective and what we're trying to accomplish. But by streamlining and condensing some of these categories, that did change some pointing in some areas. So we want to be transparent about the lens and the rigor that we did to sort of make scoring adjustments to reflect the streamlining efforts we've made. With respect to the greatest need tenant targeting selection criterion, I want to highlight the changes there. The first is that the 2019 QAP proposes emphasizing serving large families. This means we've eliminated points for single room occupancy. However, I do want to stress that there are so many priorities embedded into our overall QAP that align with our global strategic priorities that there are a lot of different opportunities for development serving different targeted populations and different objectives that meet the highest priority needs in their communities to still continue to be competitive. With that said, we continue in our rental assistance criterion to provide points for serving households at very low incomes or incomes at or below 30% of the MTSP income limits. And so SRO projects could continue to receive points through our rental assistance category which could continue to make those projects successful. We continue to emphasize serving permanent supportive housing for high priority homeless. As Mary mentioned, we have been very successful in reducing our homeless rate in the state of Minnesota, and we continue to be laser focused on that, and this QAP does not intend to make any changes there. However, one area that we are looking more rigorously at is how do our points have a measurable impact on selections? And previously, our supportive housing criterion offered 100 bonus points to applicants, but that did not have any substantive impact on these types of projects being awarded or selected for tax credits. And so after a careful evaluation of past scoring, we are recommending that these projects not the elimination of this bonus point category, but I do want to emphasize that within our scoring recalibration, we are ensuring that the just base foundational points for this category are strong enough to continue to have the same policy emphasis as we've had in prior years for this category. Lastly, with respect to people with disabilities, we made several important clarifications here, including creating a preference for people serving, for serving people with disabilities who are moving from segregated settings. And we've defined this priority to help serve people with disabilities to be in an integrated setting as no more than 25% of the units designated for people with disabilities. So we've tried to put some definition around that as well. Moving into changes that impact our serve lowest income for long duration, this criterion has been revised to focus solely on the rents affordable to tenants with incomes at or below 50% of MTSP income limits. We further adjusted the criterion by requiring a 10-year commitment. Previously, you could get additional points for serving populations at with those income limits for 10 years, but now that we are trying to stretch that policy goal to make that a requirement to achieve these specific points within the self-scoring worksheet. With respect to rental assistance, again, recognizing this is critical for reaching very low-income populations, we made several adjustments, and this is an area where we often had rental assistance points commingled with tenant targeting points in other sort of selection criteria or categories. Now we have moved all of the rental assistance into sort of the standalone category. So we hope that's more transparent and more clear. The notable changes that we've made, we've added an additional tier to this category that includes projects with a smaller percentage of units with rental assistance. And we are providing additional points for developments that target rental assistance to households with incomes at or below 30% of MTSP income limits, again, trying to minimize that rent burden. With respect to location efficiency, this is the one area within the areas of opportunity where we made several enhancements. We hope you will find this to be streamlined, more clear, and just more precise. We did align the definition of Greater Minnesota geographies with the Minnesota Department of Transportation Transit Investment Plans. We now have two distinct categories of geographies of Greater Minnesota areas, and we define sort of tiered pointing structures based on whether or not it's defined as an urbanized area, which would be an area with a population of 50,000 or more, or if it's a rural and small urban area. And then there are different tiers of reasonable transit associated with those relative locations. With respect to preservation, this is an area where we primarily added clarifications. We did eliminate the priority area location requirement that we've had previously, and we made several important clarifications related to two of our threshold requirements around market conversion and risk of loss due to ownership capacity and program commitment. Many of those clarifications relate to what's required to document that a project meets these particular threshold requirements. And I'd refer you to our scoring and change summary for more content-specific information around those. The last change we made is we are recommending that federally assisted projects be awarded points for the percentage of units assisted as opposed to a sheer number of units assisted. This is sort of a tricky policy question because we want to prioritize developments in units in different geographies and different sizes of developments. At the same time, we also want to assist as many units as possible. This felt like the fairest and most equitable method to be efficient in helping to prioritize projects based on the percentage of units assisted. Moving into the efficient use of resources and leverage, this is another area similar to rental assistance where we had scored leverage in a couple of different places in our self-scoring worksheet, both in our community and economic development area, as well as in the efficient use of scarce resources scoring category. What we've done is we've combined or we've streamlined all the scoring into our financial readiness to proceed and leverage section, but we've made sure to incorporate any previous scoring that we provided for direct funding contributions from other community and economic development partners within this particular scoring category. And we've also broken out direct funding contributions as well as other types of funding contributions that could include SAC and WAC waivers or land donation or things of that nature. So again, these continue to be an emphasis within our scoring framework, but continue to try and streamline them within one place where all leverage is counted and scored systematically. Other important and notable proposed changes in the 2019 QAP include clarifications to our plan community development. We put some parameters around the required plan or amended plan and that should be dated within the past 7 years, recognizing that market conditions can change quickly and we want that to be a relevant plan. We defined additional documentation required to support the plan, and we eliminated the requirement for a local official support letter. In our minority-owned and women-owned business enterprise priority, we added eligibility for nonprofit organizations. That summarizes sort of the primary content and scoring changes that we are proposing with the 29 QAP. I'd like to, at this time, turn it over to John Patterson, our Director of Research Evaluation, to walk through some of the rigor that we use to sort of test some of the changes we've made in our scoring to ensure that we are maintaining the integrity of the policy objectives that we are trying to achieve with the tax credit program.
Thanks, Devin. Again, this is John Patterson. I'm the Director of Planning, Research, and Evaluation at Minnesota Housing. What I'm going to do now is just walk through some of the scoring recalibration that has been discussed both by Mary and by Devin. Overall, as Mary mentioned, we were really satisfied with the projects we selected in 2017, but the process to get there was quite complicated. So through the simplification process, some scoring changes had to occur, but we really wanted to recalibrate overall scoring and make some scoring adjustments to make sure that the projects that were selected in 2017 would have also gotten selected again in 2019 if it had been used at that time. So effectively what we did was we took the 41 projects that we selected in 2014 and rescored them under different scenarios of new scoring and see how the scoring changed, which projects got selected or didn't get selected. And we did this dozens of times with different variations. So between 41 projects, dozens of variations, it was literally hundreds of different test cases that we ran to see the effects of the scoring. What we settled on was basically trying to balance all of that. And in the end, over half of the test cases, the final score we had a scoring change of 3 points, or actually less than 3 points, but they say 3 points or fewer. Put that into context, to get selected, typically projects have 80 to 90 points. So it was a minimal change in the scoring. As far as the ranking went, of the 13 selections we picked in 2017, only one project would not have been selected under the 2019 proposed QAP. So overall, I think we did a very good job of balancing all of that. To give you a little more insight into some of those scoring changes, this is sort of similar to what Devin already went through, but these are areas where some of the biggest scoring changes occurred. As Devin mentioned, we had one category before of greatest need and serving lowest income combined together. We've separated those out and made some scoring changes, and I just want to highlight some of those biggest changes. We dropped the single room occupancy, which had been 10 points. We reduced large families by 5 points from 10 to 5. We still want to emphasize large families, but realizing that those projects may be at a competitive, overly competitive, and put other projects at a disadvantage, we reduced those points slightly. We dropped the 100 bonus points for the permanent supportive housing and increased the overall points for permanent supportive housing by 10 points for the regular projects that did not get the bonus points to sort of offset and continue to preserve that incentive. On rent assistance, as Devin had mentioned, This was where we did most of the simplification. Rent assistance had its own standing category before, but also there's separate rent assistance scoring under supportive housing for people who are homeless and for disabled people. And what we did was we basically took away all those other references and all the cross-referencing to simplify it, aggregate it all in the rent assistance, and also increase the rent assistance points by 5 points overall. Just to continue that incentive. So look at that big picture of the slide you see there. Rent, should say SROs went down by 10 points. Large families went down by 5 points. Permanent supportive housing went up by 10 points, and rent assistance went up by 5 points. So there was sort of balancing out all of those changes, you know, a 10-point increase, a 10-point decrease, a 5-point increase, and a 5-point decrease. And in your packets, you have the scoring summary and changes. The last 2 pages of that has some very specific examples of these scoring changes. You can look at how all of this plays out in the minimal changes that we had. As far as preservation went, again, as Devin mentioned, we took out the geography-based part of the scoring, but we also went from having the number of rent assistance units and the share of rent assistance units to just showing the share of rent assistance units and not doing it on the absolute number of units. And we tested a bunch of cases to make sure that the scoring changes we had here still got the same relative priorities as before, and that we were successful in doing that. I do want to talk a little bit more about the location issues that Devin had mentioned. We try to focus on areas of opportunity. These include economic integration, high-performing schools, workforce housing, which is areas with job growth or a lot of jobs, access to transit. And I go through some of these maps and show where these areas we're focusing. I'm going to focus on the metro area at the beginning because I think there's a little more differentiation of bringing among communities. And then at the end, just do a quick overview of greater Minnesota because it's a different picture, but also very important. So this is showing on the map on the screen areas that are the highest income in the metro area in red. They're the top 20% of incomes, and the sort of that salmon area is the sort of middle tier of income areas. So we're incenting points of 9 points in the highest income areas, those areas in red. And if your project is located in those areas, you'll get those points. This next slide is showing high performing schools. This is areas where you have high third grade reading scores, high math scores, or high graduation rates. You basically are high in 2 of those 3 categories. And again, we'll be offering 4 points for these high performing areas. The next is workforce housing areas. And in the metro area, there's a lot of jobs and access to jobs, so most of the area qualified. Those areas in maroon have a large number of jobs or more than 500 new jobs in the last 5 years. The hatched areas, and you can see that sort of in the lower left-hand corner around Belle Plaine, is areas with long commutes. That's people traveling long distances into those communities for their jobs. And again, you would get 3 or 6 points in those categories. The next one is access to transit. And this map shows the areas in maroon are the light rail and bus rapid transit and commuter rail stations. The blue areas are, actually the greenish areas are the Metro Transit's highest frequency areas, and the blue areas are regular day service in the areas. And again, you get the points that you can see on the screen by being located in those areas. So if you take all these maps and you layer them all on top of each other and add all the points up, you can see which geographies we are giving the highest priority to. And those blues, dark blue areas are the highest pointing areas. And think about it in concept, where those highest areas are in the suburbs, particularly the outer ring suburbs, they're the areas with access to transit. Those are areas of higher income, good access to schools, and really what it is access to transit and puts them to the highest tiers. If you look in Minneapolis and St. Paul, the areas that point the highest are the highest income areas of Minneapolis and St. Paul. So there's a good distribution among inner city and out in the suburbs, sort of spreading out where affordable housing will be going. Is really new construction that will be driven by this, and those are the areas with the highest pointing. I should point out that preservation, those units with rent assistance, have 30 points. So a good preservation project doesn't necessarily have to get all of these areas of economic opportunity to score well. So they can also be distributed in some of the lower income areas also. Looking at Greater Minnesota, this is just sort of the same tiers we showed before, slightly different scoring, but you can see again there's a good distribution around the state of where our highest priority communities are. But again, this is 20 to 30 points that are available, and good scoring projects usually have 80 to 90 points. So this is important to have, but there are projects that could score well in other areas that wouldn't necessarily have to score well in just these areas to be selected. And that will be moving on to questions.
Hi, this is Margaret Kaplan. I just want to run through a couple of the logistics for comments for the 2019 Qualified Allocation Plan. Talk a little bit about our logistics. Oops, and I'm having computer issues here. Hold on. Okay, excellent. So access to the draft 2019 Qualified Allocation Plan will be available on our website. It's www.minnesotahousing.gov. If you go to the special announcements on the left side, that's where we will be posting it. We'll be making that available in time for our May 24th board meeting, which is when we will be putting this out for public comment. We also have an in-person session. If people really want to get into the weeds on the Qualified Allocation Plan and some of the changes on May 31st from 2 to 3, it's going to be here at Minnesota Housing, and we will also have information about how to register for that available on our website. We also have a public hearing coming up on June 14th from 10 a.m. to noon. We would love to hear from people about what your questions are, what your concerns are, and please, if you have comments, we would appreciate that they're specific as well too, because we want to be able to understand what your concerns are or what your questions are and provide some pretty specific answers to them. Our public comment period does end on June 14th at noon. You can email your comments as well as providing them at the public hearing. If you want to email comments, it's mn.housing@state.mn.us. And once again, we would love to be able to hear from you about what some of your questions are, your concerns are. We get better when you tell us what you need for your community. With that, I'm going to turn it over to some questions and answers from our crew here. And we have received a number of questions, so I am going to get us into full speaker mode here so we can take them all as a group. So, hopefully folks can hear me. Our first question is, max credits of $1.2 million is a proposed change. And somebody wanted to know, does that mean that it's $120,000 of credits per year or $1.2 million per year for 10 years? And I'm going to pass this over to Summer.
Yes, the developer cap is actually, it's $1.2 million in credits per year for the 10 years. It's overall credits that you can receive for the project. Hopefully that.
So basically, what you're saying is that every year you get $1.2 million in credits that go into equity at the front, right?
Correct.
Okay, excellent. The next question, which I think I'm going to pass along to Mary, is, if that's okay with you, is how do 4% bonds work? Are the limits the same as 9% credits?
So as many of you know, we did make several changes to the 2018 QAP that specifically addressed applications that are submitted to Minnesota Housing for approval of 4% credit allocations. And those changes that have just been approved for inclusion in the 2018 QAP are also incorporated into the 2019 QAP. And just to review for you what those are, one is we are now requiring that applications be reviewed for whether they're within the acceptable range of our predictive cost model. So the requirement is that any project that has costs that exceed the predicted cost by more than 25%
will have to go to our board of directors to specifically be approved for that exception if that is the case. The second change is there is a minimum requirement for extended affordability period of 20 years, and there are additional points if the 4% credit project extends to 25 or 30 years. So a certain number of points for 25 years and then a greater number of points for 30 years. There are also some additional points for projects that demonstrate cost effectiveness, and this will require us to post the cost levels for which points are awarded this year in 2018 will then be posted, and 4% credit projects with costs that are at or below those benchmarks will receive additional points in the 4% credits. And then finally, the a minimum number of points, and this is a change that was made back when we initially adopted the 2018 QAP. The minimum number of points for a 4% credit project is now at 40 points. So those are the four things that you need to pay attention to if you're applying to us for an allocation of 4% credits that are related to an allocation of tax-exempt bonds that you get.
Okay, I think the next question was something that John addressed in his comments, but I'm going to invite Summer up here because she's going to take the next question as well, too. The first one is, summary at a glance, I believe, indicates reduced points for units serving large families. Is this correct? And what is the point reduction? And I believe that John said the point reduction is 5 points. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
It just went from 10 points down to 5 points.
Okay. Next up for Summer, is Minnesota Housing moving toward a full online application?
The answer to that is yes, we are. This year for the 2018 RFP, we are actually moving towards a multifamily customer portal. You may have received e-news about this, and information is available online. So our RFP application will be via this online portal. The intent is that all applications and all correspondence going forward would be via this portal. So the answer is yes.
And I would just add that not only is it an online application, but there are enhanced capacities for you as developers to set up checklists for documents. And I just want to give a word of both encouragement and caution that online submission is required this year. And so I ask you to contact us sooner rather than later to get set up with your portal and to understand what documents will need to be loaded up, because we don't want to have a traffic jam on deadline day. So I think you'll find it to be a really greatly enhanced tool for you to manage your projects and your applications, but it does take a little bit of setup on your part.
And related to that, a little follow-up. So will the upload tool be replaced with a full online application where the Excel and Word documents are eliminated and it is simply entered online?
So the answer to that is no. It is an upload of the Excel version of the self-scoring worksheet and also the workbook. So you would be uploading any forms or required documents to this platform. So it's not interactive in a way to where it's an online document. It's basically uploading it to the system.
And third question in that stream, what about for 2018?
For
next year.
Are we moving in that direction, I think is the question.
Yes, it would be, it's applicable for this year upcoming RFP, and then for next year's RFP, it would be, we would be using the same service.
Okay. Here is a question I'm going to ask John to come up here and help us out, and keep Summer up here as well. Rural and more specifically tribal projects seem to be at a disadvantage based in areas with higher income, so higher income versus lower income in rural communities. What can be done to assist or address the criteria that do not provide access to higher points due to geographic location?
This is actually an issue that we addressed a couple years ago. And so the economic integration criteria that I showed on the map, and also high-performing schools, applies to the metro area and the largest cities in greater Minnesota, Duluth, Rochester, and St. Cloud. The rest of greater Minnesota, they do not apply. There is a blanket, essentially 10 points that all areas in rural Minnesota get to compensate for those points. So that's an issue that was raised in the past, and we have already taken care of it.
Okay, and with that, I've run through the questions that we've received. If somebody else has a question, please submit it now. Otherwise, for more information, we do have a number of folks that you can contact who would be happy to help you through some of your questions. Here's contact information for Summer Jefferson and for Devin Pullman. We will also have materials from this webinar available on our website, and a recorded version of it as well. So if you missed anything, you can go back and find out about it. We have about 4 more minutes for questions if you have anything. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. Once again, we would love to hear from you. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments, public comment period will be opening up at the end of May, but in the meantime, feel free to contact us and let us know what you think. Okay, we have another question that just came in. For the 19 of you who have hung on, could you outline eligible qualifying forms of rental assistance?
Essentially, project-based rental assistance is basically the type of rental assistance that would qualify under that category. It would be Section 8 project-based, housing project-based vouchers, GRH we consider as a project-based type of rental assistance. There are private rental assistance can actually be used as long as it meets the minimum requirement, which is the 4-year, has to be for a 4-year term. And if you can provide the correct documentation showing that you have a committed form of rental assistance, then it could count. And we offer technical assistance, and we can walk through some of your deal-specific questions with our underwriters. And if you have a development that or some type of rental assistance that you're considering, we can definitely discuss that and set up technical assistance with someone multifamily. And I'm sorry, rural development as well. There are some limitations in between preservation and what counts for preservation versus rental assistance. So again, it can get somewhat complicated, but we do provide extensive technical assistance to walk through a deal-specific example.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're going to close things up. In the meantime, please let us know if you have any additional comments or questions. Thank you so much.